From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about the special election in New York's 19th district. And one thing to keep an eye on, too, is not only the winner of these special elections, but the margins. There have been a couple, including one recent special election in Minnesota, where Republicans won those seats, but by about half as much as President Trump won those districts in 2020. And so that suggests that there may be a little bit of a swing going on in some of these areas. And Kim, the other thing to keep in mind is this is being reported as, the first special election in a swing district since Roe v. Wade was overturned. And that is definitely part of the Democratic candidate Pat Ryan's campaign. Some of his yard signs apparently say choice is on the ballot. And so this could maybe provide a sense, too, of whether that issue is motivating voters.
Yeah, I'd even broaden it out a little bit more in that I think that the reason to look at this is to see it as an early test of both parties' major messages for this fall. Because if you look at Pat Ryan, the Democrat, he's wanting very much to make this all about cultural and social issues on which Democrats feel that they have an advantage, in particular abortion. And what that has come down to in terms of talking points is Pat Ryan's support for a federal law ensuring that abortion will be legal nationwide versus Molinaro saying he's against such a federal move. The discussion is more nuanced when you get to the state level, but this is something Democrats are trying out. They'd like to put Republicans on the defensive over this proposal they have to federalize abortion. This is in contrast to Mark Molinaro, who is very much running the new Republican game plan of talking about soaring crime, inflation, the economy, pocketbook issues. And that's really the clash going on there. So that's how I'm sort of looking at it to see how it comes out, is whether or not this says something about what issues voters are actually paying more attention to in this coming midterm.
The other primary that caught my eye today is in Florida. It's the Democratic race for governor, and it's two people competing to figure out which one of them is going to take on Governor Ron DeSantis in the fall. The first candidate is Charlie Crist, former governor, member of Congress now, former Senate candidate. He apparently has 9 political lives. He's been a Republican, he's been a Democrat, he's been an independent. The other is Nikki Fried, who's the ag commissioner, and she's basically saying that here's voters' chance to end the career of Ron DeSantis. She says, I've been in the trenches. I've taken on DeSantis. She adds that he won't have a 2024 because he won't have a 2022. We're going to beat him in November, and we're going to kill all of his aspirations to run for president of the United States, unquote. And Monet, what do you make of that? Do you think DeSantis is in a pretty reasonably strong position here, or do you think it matters which one of these Democrats he faces?
Well, I'd start off by saying that DeSantis is in a strong position, but I don't think it's right to say that he's a shoo-in for November. A good candidate and a good campaign could theoretically stand a chance of knocking him off in the election. I point out that his approval rating in Florida is still about 50%, but that's down from about 58% earlier. So it's trending downward a little bit, maybe because of all the controversies that have been mounted on him. Sort of a lot of negative media coverage from people who see him as a potential promising 2024 candidate. And also, if you look at the head-to-head polls, having him run against either Nikki Fried or Charlie Crist, he is leading again, but not by a huge margin. You see something like a 6% or 7% lead. And so, these elections sometimes swing late. DeSantis himself had a little bit of a comeback win against Andrew Gillum in Florida 4 years ago. And so it certainly isn't something to take for granted that he necessarily would beat either candidate. But in terms of which candidate would be better for him to run against, I don't know if there's a huge distinction to be made among voters between Charlie Crist and Nikki Fried, at least on political grounds. Charlie Crist obviously does have a history as both a Republican and then an independent, but he certainly has pivoted a lot since leaving the Republican Party. He's running his campaign on expanding abortion access and clearly trying to sort of show off his progressive bona fides. And so I think that when it comes to the general election in November, you're still going to have a very clear contrast between DeSantis as sort of an avowed conservative and a very, very clear progressive candidate in either Crist or Fried.
Kim, what's your take on this? And I think Monet is right that DeSantis' win in 2018 was a pretty close run thing. He was behind in many of the polls leading up to Election Day, but that was also 4 years ago. And it seems to me that maybe Florida is a little bit more of a red state than it was 4 years ago. And frankly, maybe Governor DeSantis has helped push it that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, it's become a refuge for people who were fleeing blue states during the pandemic, and also just because people want a better economic climate, which is something that DeSantis has provided them. Republican registrations have been way on the rise there. And all that has to be put against what you see is a lot of Democratic stories that would like to suggest, I think, a lot more weakness there for Republicans than actually exists. This has been one of the interesting, slow-moving stories over the past decade. The Republicans have really solidified their grasp a little bit more on the state. It's not to say it's not a swing state anymore, but it's more of a lean red swing state. I think that whether or not DeSantis faces Nikki Fried or Charlie Crist, he's in a very strong position. Especially, don't forget, too, that Crist has struck out. He lost in 2014 to Rick Scott. Floridians have had their chance to elect him in the past. And there's not a lot that DeSantis has done to really get crosswise with his base or with independents in the state. Yes, some of the issues he's taken on, he's been vilified by the national press, but there are also issues that seem to make a lot of sense just to your average common sense person. For instance, why are we teaching sex ed to kids forcibly in the first grade or kindergarten, especially if their parents object? So I think he's actually in a pretty good position, as is Marco Rubio. There's also been a lot of talk about challenges to him and the potentiality that he could get knocked off this cycle. I find all those a little bit wild.
Finally, the latest in the news on the FBI search of President Trump's home in Mar-a-Lago is that the magistrate judge who signed off on the warrant has been asked again to release the affidavit that the FBI filed in support of the warrant. He has now issued an order, and this repeats kind of what he said from the bench on Thursday, to ask the FBI to file their proposed redactions to the warrant affidavit by Thursday, and then he will review that and decide whether to release it with redactions, what those redactions might look like. And it seems like there's still a lot of uncertainty about which way he's going to go, Monet. But again, in the absence of hard information about what is in those boxes, it seems like this remains a political Rorschach test for people. I mean, you can tell a story that what was in those boxes was classified material inside of letters that President Trump shared with Kim Jong-un, or Kim Jong-un shared back, things that might at least plausibly be seen by him as mementos. And the Justice Department has really overreached. You can also tell the other side of the story, which is that there was real classified material in there about Iran's nuclear program, to take one thing. And if that's the case, it would look pretty reckless to be holding that stuff in a club with people coming and going all the time, and in which case maybe the FBI's search was justified. And I don't know. I hope that we get something from this judge and this affidavit. Otherwise, I don't know how we're ever going to settle this argument, Monet.
Right. I mean, I think one thing that's very frustrating to anyone who's following this story closely is how much of the coverage is focused on the sheer scale of the documents that Trump was holding at Mar-a-Lago, some of which he had already turned over. But it's like we're getting reports day after day talking about how he had turned over 150 classified documents. And as you were saying, it is kind of a Rorschach test. The people who are already inclined to believe that Trump is guilty of some kind of serious mishandling of important information can point to that number and the sort of gradual process by which he turned over records to the Justice Department as an indication that he was hiding something quite serious. But to date, it's been 2 weeks now, and we don't really have any more of a direct sense of what was the specific sensitive information that might have motivated the Justice Department to take the unprecedented step of conducting the raid on Trump's household. And so the details are being hashed out between the former president and several judges, sort of regarding how the affidavit might be partially revealed or perhaps even as a whole. And we would get sort of a clearer insight into what directly motivated the raid. But I think that everyone is just hoping that it's going to take place at some point soon and that we'll have a little bit clearer information.
Kim, what's your view on this? I mean, do you think that we are getting much new information, or is the political debate kind of going in circles the way that it has basically since the raid took place? It's kind of what it seems like to me.
Well, just putting the substance aside, can we talk a minute about the process here? I think for those of us who covered the whole Russia collusion hoax, the echoes here are very loud and very disturbing. We're seeing these leaks about what was supposedly seized and the numbers, all of it coming from unnamed sources who were supposedly familiar with the investigation. And all of these leaks are coming all designed to strengthen the Department of Justice's case for why it did this and the FBI's case for why it did this, even as the Department of Justice is pushing in court to not release any of the information that would actually give us the full picture on this. Does any of this sound familiar? I mean, this was exactly the game plan back when we were doing basically convicting Donald Trump via press leak back during the whole Russia collusion allegations. So there's that. Now, we'll see what's in here, but to echo Monet, there's so many things that have not been answered here. We don't know what is contained within this material. We don't know what the intent was of the president for having these documents, meaning was it a mix-up in the chaos of leaving the White House? Did things end up there that shouldn't? Did he take them deliberately? Are there many things that he thinks are in fact actually should belong to him, are covered under executive privilege? I would note that even as this federal magistrate judge is getting ready to decide the question of the scope of the redactions or whether he will release this affidavit, that the Trump team has now filed a motion asking another federal judge in Florida to appoint an independent arbiter, a special master, to review all the documents seized and to look to see how many of them, if any of them, fall outside the scope of the warrant or are protected by executive privilege or by attorney-client privilege, which certainly suggests there's another side to this, that perhaps the Trump team really does feel as though some of this wasn't necessarily obviously meant to go back to the National Archives. We just don't know any of this until some of this has gone public. But just overall, a lot of this still smells bad and doesn't necessarily inspire a lot of confidence, at least when it comes to the leaks and the way the Department of Justice is conducting itself.
Thank you, Kim and Monet. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.